This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Living Legends of Oklahoma. I'm interviewing Colonel George A. Fisher of Oklahoma City, a veteran of World War II and also a veteran of more than 20 years with the 45th Infantry Division. Mr. Fisher lives in Oklahoma City at the present time, and your address is
525 Northwest 40th.
Mr. Fisher will be telling us principally about the World War II area of the 45th Infantry Division, and will be relating it from the movement overseas. Colonel Fisher.
The landing of the 45th in Sicily was accompanied by a terrific bombardment. Two boys, one by the name of Homer C. Buck, and another one by the name of Robinson. Robinson was a captain, were the first casualties. Buck was killed by Italian machine gun fire, and Robinson was killed by German fire. Benjamin Blackmer, in the case of Buck, landed. He was a first lieutenant at the time, charged the Italian machine gun nest, and got all 13 of the ITIs who had zeroed in on Buck, and one of them came out yelling imprecations at Mussolini and God bless Roosevelt at the same time. He spared him. Kenneth Harrison was Indian, very much Indian. As a matter of fact, he was a member of the Chilocco Company, which I had the honor to command. Kenneth would not take out insurance. So the regimental commander and I got him apart one day, and the regimental commander said, "No one can afford not to have insurance." He said, "Sir, one time, a long time ago, my family were getting along fine. And then all of a sudden, they came into some money. And those Indians spent that money right and left, and pretty soon they didn't have anything. Now they're happy again. I don't want to make them unhappy at this time." Kenneth Harrison was killed the first day on Sicily. We drove across Sicily, and then on 10 September 1943 onto the Italian mainland. And on the 22nd day of September, the 180th Infantry got in a real trap. There were Germans on three sides of them. The Battle of the Aqueduct at Oliveto. The casualties were tremendous. Ernest Childers had been hit, and he had a broken foot. He had started to cross a bridge and had fell into a ravine, and one of my men assisted him on this and did a real good job. A fellow named Truax helped him. He brought up a bunch of, shall we say, stragglers, put them into a line, and Childers attacked the enemy battalion command post over on the right side of the mountain. This brought back something that had happened almost a year before down in the mountains southwest of Camp Barclay, Texas, near Abilene. Childers was my first sergeant. I was pinned down hopelessly. The battalion was pinned down. The whole regiment was pinned down. Childers took a platoon of Charlie Company of the 180th from Chilocco, Oklahoma, and made an end run and captured the enemy command post. This is exactly what he did at Oliveto, Italy. Well, Childers at Oliveto went forward. He was out of hand grenades. He was out of everything except he had his little carbine, and he threw rocks into the foxholes of the Germans, causing them to jump out. And the men who were in on it told me before I wrote up the Medal of Honor that there must have been at least 20 Germans there that were shot and killed. And in any event, he got into the enemy command post. He missed the battalion commander, who was out on some sort of reconnaissance, but he got the entire battalion staff. For this action, Ernest Childers was awarded the Medal of Honor. The use of Indian language on the radio by the soldiers of Company C, Chilocco, was a tradition in the 180th Infantry. It was absolutely confusing to the enemy, and the language used was Choctaw. Company C had had a long tradition at Chilocco. It had been organized and was captained for years by Captain Roger S. Denman, D-E-N-M-A-N. The company was characterized by a tremendous spirit of morale. I can remember when we would be out on hikes, and I was supposed to be at the head of the company as the company commander, but you were to run in case you came to a hill, that is, up the hill, not down the hill, but up the hill. I arrived at the top of the hill many a time with the Chilocco guidon barrier at my side and completely out of breath. Of course, the Charlie doll has always been a favorite decoration for the Chilocco guidon. The Charlie doll is nothing in the world but a rubber doll that is put on the guidon. It's an indent in shape. The next Medal of Honor occurred by reason of the action of Jack Montgomery of Muskogee, Oklahoma, on the Anzio beachhead. The enemy had attacked with overwhelming numbers in February 1944 and threatened to overrun the beachhead. Jack Montgomery had a man or two knocked down, and the Germans were firing from a house. I can't say just how many that he killed, but he charged this house single-handedly, and it strikes me there was 30-some that were killed there. I have it in my book that he killed with rifle fire that day. That always goes back to an action earlier in Italy in October 1943. I should have recommended him for the Congressional Medal of Honor then, because it was a much more decisive victory. He absolutely wiped out a German blocking or area and utterly destroyed the effectiveness of an entire rifle company. But I didn't know then what it took to get a Medal of Honor, because Childers had not yet been awarded his Medal of Honor. Incidentally, Childers' Medal of Honor left the 45th Division recommended for a Distinguished Service Cross, but the Medal of Honor must go all the way to the President, who decides which award will be awarded. The Treadwell Medal of Honor occurred on 18 March 1945 in an area near the Blees River in the German Siegfried Line. Jack Treadwell was commanding Company F. He used the best methods known to try to breach the German line, which consisted of these dagger-tooth or sawtooth obstacles, and there were 6 of these pillboxes. Treadwell shouted at a tanker, "Come on, follow me," and went himself. He carried 2 satchel charges, and he ran to the first pillbox, under fire all the way. I don't know why he wasn't hit. He put that one there, blew that one up. He blew a second one up. The tanker followed him, and shall we say he just blew all 6 pillboxes up. They brought more satchel charges to him, and he took them and put them in place. Company F went through, the battalion went through, the 180th Infantry Regiment went through, and the division went through, and by that time the gap was several miles wide. And that's the story there. Doc Reichman could probably give you more about the origin of the 45th Division News than I can. I remember at Fort Sill in 1940, some members of the Daily Oklahoman having been inducted into active duty. The first one I can think about is old George Tapscott, who became the 45th Division photographer. The next thing I know, there was a kid came to the headquarters. Don Robinson wasn't there yet, but he was soon to follow. But this kid that came there, we couldn't believe that he was anything but a kid. His name was Malden, and he got a fellow by the name of Reg Manning of the Phoenix, Arizona newspaper to draw a cartoon for the 45th. As I recall, it was a chain, and forging the chain, a chain of defense. Well, the 45th Division News soon developed, and of course Don Robinson, when Joe Stalker was transferred out, Don took charge and became the managing editor. At Fort Devens, Massachusetts, in 1942, Malden and some of them came to me and tried to get me to get a officer that they had in there kicked out and get myself appointed as the Division Special Service Officer, because they had been made accountable to this officer. Well, I couldn't do that. But Malden, I had quite an experience with him. At Camp Barkley, Texas in 1941, he wrote the Star Spangled Banner, B-A-N-T-E-R. It was to be published by a publishing company that wasn't the best, and I wrote his contract. The contract contained a provision that Malden was to keep all the royalties from the sales at Camp Barkley, Texas. Well, that's where the division was stationed, and there weren't hardly any sales anyplace else. Malden was not a well-known person at that time. Among my archives, I have a book that says, "The Star Spangled Banner to me legal advisor, Bill Malden." There's not money enough to buy that book off of me. The thing was that Don Robinson was a very, very keen judge of human nature. He stayed within bounds, within the limits prescribed by Colonel Reichman, RG2, and yet ran a real good newspaper. As a matter of fact, the first year in Italy, why, it got the all-camp newspaper award for the best newspaper in the United States Army. The Adjutant General of Oklahoma still has the little old cup that was given, and we had people like Fred Sheehan. Fred was one of my boys from the 180th who joined the company, and well, Don Robinson was the head of it, and of course George Tapscott was the photographer, continued all through the war as such. You know, one of the greatest things was the day the boys came to me and had the first American newspaper published in Sicily. It was a one-page affair. I still have a copy of it. Wouldn't trade it for anything. And it was rather crude, but with what they'd been up against. I know I was with them one night, even though I was 180th personnel officer at the time, when we were in a building, and Malden was scared that the German bomber that was flying over was going to drop bombs on us. But they went on and published a thing, putting out such things as special Christmas issues and special issues of first day in combat, second day in combat, everything that you would think of. And quite frankly, I've seen a lot of small town newspapers that couldn't keep up with it. How's that? His name I couldn't remember was Bill Barrett. About all I can think to say is that I fully appreciate the fact that the 45th Division Association has placed on this program of this 1969 reunion the words, quote, "Whatever destiny may hold in store for our great country, and however long that country's military history may continue, readers in the future will search long before finding a chapter more brilliant than that written by the quill that was dipped in the blood of the Thunderbirds." That I wrote in 1945, just prior to our inactivation from active duty.
Colonel Fisher, you were the Civil Affairs Officer for the 45th Division in the Korean War, which involved your relationships on a civil affairs basis with the civilians in Japan, and then particularly refugee problems and other civil affairs problems in Korea. I wonder if you would tell us something about the experience some of the experiences in Japan with civilians.
We came to the island of Hokkaido in the spring of 1951. At that time, the 16th Corps at Sendai had practically written off the island of Hokkaido. It was fair prey for the Russians at any time they chose to move in. But the President of the United States personally directed that our division go to Hokkaido. The Japanese were recovering greatly even at that time. Now, this does not mean that they had recovered from World War II. But I saw on the island of Hokkaido, while there, in my capacity of Civil Affairs Officer, actual iron foundry and steel plants of a size that I had not seen in the Ruhr or in the Saar in World War II. I was never in the Ruhr, but it would have been a tragedy to have let that island fall into the hands of the enemy. The Russians had concentrated 5 divisions on Sahagalin Island and on some of the Kuriil Islands to the northeast, and by September 18, 1951, had these poised in order to make a thrust at Hokkaido. I was detailed, and I'm sure this has been cleared since then, to go to the island of Sendai by Major General Styron, commander of the 45th Infantry Division, and find out exactly what sort of help we could get and expect on Hokkaido. I spent the better part of a week, at which time the Chief of Staff and the G3 called me in and told me I was wasting my time, that they couldn't give any help whatsoever. I was not just there as a Civil Affairs Officer. I was there in a supernumerary General Staff capacity to investigate everything from personnel through intelligence, training, and everything else, and supply. They couldn't supply us with anything. Oh, when we first got to the islands, why, They sent 40-some tanks. We didn't have any tanks for our tank battalion until those got there. But the Japanese chief of police on the island assured me that they would have plenty of people watching to see that those tanks got through safely to us. And they did get through safely to us. But there were those who would want them not to get through. I have some maps that show the location at that time of every communist cell on the island of Hokkaido. Every last one of them as they existed at that time. One day I got Mr. Nomura, the chief of the National Police, in and took him to task for not getting rid of the communists on Hokkaido. He said to me, well, if the colonel will but give me the instructions, there will be no communists on Hokkaido tomorrow. I wanted very much to give those instructions, but of course couldn't do so. Now, there on Hokkaido, my liaison as far as civil affairs are concerned was with the Hokkaido Civil Affairs Bureau. There I met Governor Tanaka, who was a prefectural official. I also met other friends, Japanese, with whom I still correspond, and it was a wonderful situation. I would go out and look at these various plants, a fertilizer plant, for example, which could have been converted into the making of gunpowder in 48 hours without any trouble. I would collect information. They furnished it to me very willingly. Incidentally, I say this without malice, I furnished all of that information to a staff officer of the division who put out a book on Hokkaido and its resources and so forth that was supposed to contain my name. It did not contain my name. It contained only his name. That's enough. Well, the 45th did its job on Hokkaido. The Russians didn't come in, and in the meantime, the 45th did a marvelous public relations job with the Japanese people. The Japanese were used to having regular army people there, and they weren't always treated like people ought to be treated. I know we had the street light campaign in which we put in street lights in Sapporo. We had Japanese children out to our messes for dinner, and in general, the Japanese seem to think, at least, that we might be an exception to what they considered a not too good white race. We had work. Our men contributed money. I don't want to say where all this money came from, but they built a church, a Christian church, a non-denominational Christian church in Chitose. And from that effort, there are now 22 Christian churches on the island of Hokkaido. There was work with orphanages. Now, this was the work of the individual soldiers. It wasn't a command project or anything. I want to stress that. And when we left Hokkaido for Korea, most certainly there was sadness on the island of Hokkaido. I was the executive officer of our advanced group of the division in Korea. We went up and took over the positions of the 1st Cavalry Division. The took over the positions of the 1st Cavalry Division. The 1st Cavalry Division civil affairs officer was drunk when I arrived. He wasn't in position to perform his duties. He was drinking Korean whiskey, and he could have cared less whether or not school kept. I had some other duties to perform, being the overall executive officer. But Dr. Mark Johnson of Oklahoma City and I went up forward, and everything was just going fine. We had no lights or anything else. We had the division area staked out. I got my mail for the first time in about 2 weeks, and in it was a letter from my wife that she had let my GI insurance lapse. And Mark Johnson gave me a physical on the spot in pretty much of the lamplight up there in the forward. And I got that off. Once we got the division in there, which was the early part of December, and got things strung out, I discovered an entirely different situation than I had had on Japan. I found that I had 380 some odd Korean security police in 2 companies, and about 100 Korean national police in another company. They had been gravely misused or not used at all, and we set to work creating a place where they could live, and got them out on the lines in the night. We picked up enemy agents who came through, and in general, I was told at least by the Corps commander that I was the first civil affairs officer to make the proper use of the Korean security police. For example, here's something that happened in my refugee center one time. A man was brought in, and he claimed to be innocent in all respects, when all of a sudden one of my Korean lieutenants knocked him down. I asked what it was all about, and the Korean said that he came from an area in North Korea, a gun, where this man had said he had lived all of his life. The man was not from there. He didn't know where he was from, but he knew everyone in there and that this man was not from there. Needless to say, why, this individual was taken care of in the proper way. Out of about every 40 or 50 refugees to come through that would be picked up by the Korean security police, there would be on an average of 3 or 4 enemy agents. Our job was to sort through and find those agents. I don't know whether we got them all or not, probably didn't. But that was our average. If they were low-grade agents, and Major Sabota of our CIC and the Korean CIC, by the time they got through with them, they generally knew. But if they were low-grade agents, disposition was made in the hills. If they were high-grade agents, they were sent back for further questioning. Now, this is about my boy Sammy. He always claimed to be the minimum of 16 years old, which you had to be to work as a laborer. Sammy, however, was a translator, as well as, in other words, he could speak our language, he could write our language, he could read it, and I've never seen anyone who was any more proficient. Well, Sammy was from Seoul. When I left, I gave Sammy everything I had that could be used, and he went on with the new civil assistance officer. We kept in touch, however, over the years, and now Sammy is in Toronto, Canada, with his wife and his 3 children. He is a graduate both of the Japanese computer school and the IBM 360 school, and I trust he will soon be on the way to Oklahoma City, where I have employment for him.